Okay. So good evening, everybody. My name is Susan M. Hart-Servideo. I'm from the Rutgers Cooperative Extension of Ocean County. And tonight, Patty Dixon, who's also my horticulturist in the office, is joining, or Debbie Lugatuda? Did I?
Latitude. Yes.
Lagatuda. Ah, I tried, I try so much. Sorry. Debbie is here to help present a talk on how to grow dazzling dahlias, and she is a master gardener in Monmouth County. And we would just love to thank you for coming on with us and joining with us and letting us know how to grow those dahlias because they are beautiful, but I always have a little trouble trying to keep them, whether I want to keep them for the winter time or not. So I'm going to stop there because you all know I can talk. So I'm going to turn it over to Debbie. And thank you again, Debbie.
You're welcome. Okay, trying to advance the slide.
Touch your mouse or your mouse to the screen, and then it should be able to use your arrows. There you go.
There you go. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for being here tonight. So I really concur with this statement that dahlias are worthy of inclusion on the list of the world's loveliest flowers. Um, it's true, peonies in the spring are gorgeous, roses in the summer, but dahlias are just as breathtaking. They're grown for their magnificent flowers, and if you follow some basic practices that I'm going to share with you tonight, you can have truly dazzling dahlias. So these are the topics I'm going to cover. Just a brief history, some interesting facts that I've found when I was creating this program, some characteristics about the genus. I'll introduce you to all the different types of dahlias. We'll talk about tubers, purchasing tubers, and some tips that I've learned along the way. And then we'll get into preparing the beds, planting, how to care for the dahlias, staking and pinching, which is really important if you want dazzling dahlias, how to harvest blooms, how to dig and store tubers over winter. And that should take us about an hour. And then if you can stay just a little bit longer, we can talk about the few pests and diseases that you might encounter. And I'm going to share with you a technique I use for overwintering dahlias in the ground. And then we'll do a little problem solving. So to go into the history, the native range of dahlias are in the higher elevations of Central America, and they were cultivated by the Aztecs as food for themselves as well as animal fodder. In the 16th century, the Spaniards discovered the dahlias growing in the high plains of Mexico. And then a couple centuries later, the botanists started sending tubers to Europe, specifically to the University of Madrid and the Madrid Botanical Garden. And they first, their idea was to make it a food crop, but that didn't work out as well as they thought it would. And then when they saw how beautiful the blooms were, they started hybridizing them for their flowers. Um, exact date the dye was introduced to the US is not certain. They think it was near Boston in the 1920s sometime. So dahlias are incredibly diverse. Plant heights range from 12 inches to 6 feet tall. Bloom sizes are an incredible 1 inch to sometimes over 10 inches in diameter. And, think about that, how big that is. Foliage is, usually green, but some varieties have deep mahogany foliage and dark stems. And there are tens of thousands of named cultivars. 10 to 20,000 are recognized in the US, and over 50,000 different dahlias are registered with the Royal Horticultural Society in England. They have a very long growing season and bloom time. Here in New Jersey, in our zone, we plant tubers after the last frost in the spring. Dahlias bloom mid-July through the first frost. And what I like about them the most is they look their best when other flowers are fading. Like right now, the gardens, the perennials, everything's kind of going to bed, but dahlias are looking great. That photo I'm showing there, Chilson's Pride, is one I've grown, and that's a really pretty dahlia. So there's an amazing array of petals, petal forms, and colors. The petals can be pointy, rolled, rounded, flat, swirled, you name it, single, double. every color you can think of except true blue, true black, and green. You might see some um, advertisers being, there's one called the Black Dahlia or something like that. It's really just a really dark maroon. The petals can be striped, solid, bicolored, tricolored pattern tips. And some of them, they actually change color as they mature. This one I'm showing here, tartan, almost every petal is unique. Some of them are, solid burgundy, some of them are pure white, some are edge and burgundy. So the flowers themselves are incredibly diverse. The dahlia was named after the Swedish botanist Anders Dahl, although there is no record as to why or what his connection was. There's no known connection with him and dahlias, so nobody really knows why he got this distinction. Um, they are winter hardy in the warmer zones, 8 to 11, and I heard we have somebody here from Florida, but they are not hardy in 7 and lower. Tubers and petals are edible, and the tubers taste like a combination between jicama and a potato, although I don't know why you would want to eat them. And the petals are edible, and you can toss them in a salad, and it really makes it look pretty. It is the Mexican national flower and the official flower of the city of Seattle. And you can imagine with all those names and registered cultivars, you get some pretty wild names. I just listed a couple here. But it's kind of fun to see all the names that these hybridizers come up with. There's professional Dahlia societies, the American Dahlia Society, and we do have a New Jersey Dahlia Society. They put on a Dahlia show up in Morris Township every year in August. Unfortunately, this year it got canceled for obvious reasons. Um, the American Dahlia Society puts out a fabulous 50 list every year where they pick their best 50 dahlias every year. So that's kind of interesting to look at. Just for grins, I received my latest version of Fine Gardening magazine, and look what's on the cover. Extraordinary Dahlias. I did read the article, and I'm telling you everything that's in there you're going to hear tonight. So dahlias grow from tubers, not bulbs. Some people say they come from bulbs. They don't. So what is a tuber? It's a swollen underground stem. It looks similar to a small sweet potato. And that's the food source for the plant before it starts to photosynthesize. And these tubers are the way you propagate the dahlias year after year. So these are the parts of a dahlia tuber system. We'll start at the top. That's last year's stem. Right below the stem and the tubers themselves is the crown. And that's where the eyes are, and that's where the new growth comes from. And then you see the 3 tubers there. They look like the small sweet potatoes. And then there's last year's roots. So the growth points are in the crown, and I've got them circled in this photo. To produce a plant, the tuber must have at least one eye attached to it, and this is where the new growth originates. Sometimes when you buy the tubers, they're already sprouting. That's okay. You can still plant them, and sometimes they're even sending up shoots, and that's okay too. If the shoots and the sprouts are, kind of long, you can cut them down to 1 inch before you plant, and it's okay. It'll be fine. So tubers come in all shapes and sizes, and its size and shape does not matter at all. It does not influence the size of the blooms or the plants. Some are long and skinny, some are tiny little balls. There's 2 dahlias there, Drummer Boy and Labyrinth. They produce the same size plants, same size blooms, yet Drummer Boy tubers are enormous and Labyrinth smaller than average. So there's no correlation. One time I ordered a dahlia and I got it. It was like the tuber was the size of a walnut. And I was like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. I paid $15 for this. But, the grower assured me it didn't make a difference, and they were right. So I'm going to introduce you to the different types of dahlias. And they're classified mostly according to the style of their bloom. And it's just a method to group them. And it also helps you know what kind of dahlia you're dealing with. And the first one is the anemone dahlia. And so that has an outer ray of petals, and then the center is kind of like a little pincushion. The blooms are kind of small, 2 to 4 inches. The plants are about 4 feet high. Then you have the pom-pom. Now that is not a typo. I always thought it was pom-pom, but it's not. So this one looks like a tiny little perfect honeycomb. It's perfectly round. The blooms are small, only up to about 2 inches. And the plants are relatively small, not that tall, 2 to 3 feet. And one thing to be careful of when you order dahlias and you're looking at them online or in a catalog, they like that looks like a really big bloom. It's probably like no bigger than a quarter. And I once ordered one which I thought was larger, and it was just this tiny little petite dahlia. But that's okay. That looks really pretty in arrangements too. But just make sure that's one of the reasons why they classify them. So when you see it, this is a pom-pom variety, it's going to be smaller. Then you have the ball dahlia, which are very similar to the pom-pom, but they're the honeycomb, but they have a little bit of a flattened top, and the blooms are slightly larger. They're up to 3.5 inches. And the plants themselves are relatively, um, compact, 2 to 4 feet. And that's another point I want to make. Just because something's a ball dahlia doesn't mean it's going to be 3 feet tall. The heights differ depending on what variety. So it's important to check that out if you're ordering or buying a ball dahlia, or any dahlia actually. Then we have the collarettes, which are really unique looking. These are usually compact plants up to 2 feet tall, small to medium flowers. So they have an outer ray of petals, and then they have an inside wreath of petals that are usually a different color. And that's why they call this a collarette. So you have like that little collar of petals in the center. And here's one called Pooh, which is not the greatest name, but it's named after Winnie the Pooh. But I thought that was especially beautiful. Then we have the border dahlias. You might have heard of border dahlias. They're bushy, compact plants, but they do produce pretty good size 4 to 5 inch flowers. So in order to be considered a border dahlia, it can't be any higher than 24 inches. Most of them are between 12 to 20 inches. So they're ideal for the front of a border. They don't need staking because they're compact and bushy. They tend to bloom earlier than other types, and they're perfect for container growing. Then you have the cactus dahlia. You can tell why. Their petals are very finely quilled and pointy and rolled. And the blooms on a cactus dahlia can be from giant to small, very diverse bloom sizes. Pretty tall plants. Most cultivars reach about 40 inches tall. And these have the best tasting tubers. And I actually got that fact from a dahlia farmer who I guess has tasted them all. And he said cactus dahlias are the best tasting. So there you go. Then you have the semi-cactus, which are similar to the cactus, but their petals are broader, and less than half of them are the tightly quilled ones. But they're very pretty. Then you have the decorative dahlias. These types of dahlias have the widest range of colors and patterns, and blooms can be anywhere from 10 inches to 4 inches, very diverse. And decorative dahlias are divided into 2 subcategories, the formal decoratives and the informal. The one I'm showing you, Hawaii, I've actually grown that one. It's beautiful, and that is formal. It's kind of very neatly arranged. The informal decorative, which I'll show you the next slide, is a little more irregular. The petals kind of twist and are rolled, not as symmetrical as the formal decorative. And this one is called Labyrinth. And look at how beautiful. I'm growing that one right now in my garden. And last year you couldn't even get a labyrinth. I don't know what it was, but they were in very short supply. But it is actually this beautiful. The petals curl and twist, and it just is really pretty. And this is what it looks like in my garden. In July on the left, the blooms weren't as large and they weren't as colorful, but as the summer wore on, they got bigger and more colorful. And it really is a beautiful dahlia. I would highly recommend it. Then we have the dinner plates. You might have heard that term. These are the big boys. These are the largest, heaviest blooms of any category. Plants get up to 5 feet tall. They need a lot of room to grow. So perfect for the rear of a flower bed. And these absolutely need to be staked. We're going to talk more about staking later, but you insert the stake when you plant the tuber and then you tie them up as they grow. These are the big boys. This is one I'm growing in my garden called Bella Farmera. It's very impressive. It looks like Hawaiian punch. I took this photo a couple days ago. Um, this bloom is 7 inches across. It's really big. It's beautiful. And this is a couple years ago. That's a salad plate. That's an 8-inch plate, and you can see how big. That's Lavender Perfection is the name of that dahlia, and it actually is that big. And then I just, for fun, every time you see a catalog or advertisement for a dinner plate dahlia, they show them next to the child's head, just to give you an idea of how big these flowers actually are. It's actually kind of funny. They all do it too. So then we have the single type dahlias. These are fairly compact plants. They have a single row of petals. They overlap without any gaps. And many of these, you can get them in the dark colored foliage. You can see the 3 rows of pollen in the center, and the pollinators love them. And here's an example of one that has dark foliage called Dark Side of the Sun. And look at how dramatic that is. That would really add a punch to your garden. The one thing about the dark foliage is you can't overuse it because then they don't stand out at all. But isn't that pretty? Then you have the mignon. They're compact plants. Same flower as the single dahlia I just showed you, but with more rounded tips, smaller blooms. They have a contrasting center. And these are ideal for growing in containers or the front of the border. I have never grown these, but I think I'm going to try. Look at how pretty that is. And then you have the water lily. Obviously, you know how it got its name. It looks kind of like a water lily. The petals are rounded, spiraled around pretty tightly, slightly flattened, and they have less petals and they're kind of more shallow blooms, but they get up to 5 inches. The plants can be anywhere from 2 to 5 feet. Very, very pretty. And here's one. I'm pretty sure it's a water lily. I took this photo at Longfield Gardens, and this was just so beautiful. And as you can see, as the petals, mature, they lose their magenta edging. But isn't that gorgeous? Then you have the peony type dahlias. So these have 2 to 5 rows of petals surrounding the disc, and blooms can be various sizes, large, medium, or small, height 2 to 3 feet, and they attract pollinators. Then you have the orchid flowering. The single orchid on the left, the white one, has open centered blooms with 1 row of petals surrounding the disc, and the double orchid on the bottom, the pink giraffe, does not have a disc, and the petals are double, and it's really pretty. And then this is one I never heard of before. I started putting together this presentation. They're called laciniated, and look at how frilly they are. Really different. I've never seen these grown before, and I just learned about them. So I might have to try this too, but the tips of the petals are frilly, twists and curls, and they're split. The center of it rarely opens. Medium-sized blooms up to 6 inches, and decent-sized plants up to 4 feet. So I learned something new when I was putting this together. And some dahlias dahlias are considered to be heirlooms, and that's any variety that was introduced before 1969. And why that year, I do not know. This variety, Selwood Glory, that I'm showing here, was introduced in 1949, and it was found and discovered in the historic Selwood neighborhood of Portland, Oregon. So that's pretty interesting. And I tried to buy this last year, and everywhere I tried was sold out. So I think it's very popular, and they say it's got this beautiful purple um, petal tipped in silvery white, and that just sounded so pretty to me. But I couldn't get it anywhere, so I don't know why that is. But when we talk about purchasing, um, sometimes it pays to buy early so you get what you want. All right, so I'm going to stop there to see if anybody has any questions about different varieties or the history of dahlias.
I don't see anything just yet, but I was going to give people a minute to, or not even a full minute, but if there's any questions, please type it in the chat or into the Q&A. And depending on how long their question is, that's only.
I saw one just come in. Where do I purchase my dahlias from? I'm going to get into that.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's the only one right at the moment that I do see for this round.
All right. So moving on. Here we go. Purchasing tubers. How about that?
There you go.
Okay. So when you purchase your tubers and you're selecting your varieties, you might, if you're going to make bouquets, you might want to think about your color palette. Think about your bloom size, the shape, select varieties that might look good together. Some varieties are better for cutting than others. And the grower, when you order them from their growers' websites, they'll usually tell you that. And different flower forms create interest. You see how we got that white cactus dahlia, and we've got some formal decoratives. And it's just a really pretty color palette. So, when you're ordering, you might want to consider that. When you're ordering, keep track of what, the varieties and the colors. I just take a screenshot. Actually, I'm growing these two in my garden right now. This was last year's order, but I never remember, what did I order? What was I thinking when I ordered it? That type of thing. Sometimes I just, create a little spreadsheet. It depends. This year, I just happened to take a screenshot, but keep track of what you ordered. And that one I ordered honeydew. This is what it looks like in my garden this year, September 8th. And actually, right outside the window here, it still looked like that. And actually, the picture doesn't do this justice. It's a little washed out, but it was absolutely beautiful. I was very pleased with this variety. So, you'll see dahlias for sale in the big box store. And I get a little, and I'm not saying I have never bought them in a big box store. I have, because I can't pass it by without checking it out, of course. But I'm wondering, how long have they been stored indoors in a warm environment? Did they wait outside in a truck? Did the tubers freeze? Are they, inspect the bag as best you can, because you don't want anything that's too shriveled up or sprouting, 6-inch, sprouts. I tend to shy away, and you're really limited to just a couple of varieties that they offer. So, but that's okay. If that's how you want to start, if you've never grown dahlias before, that's perfectly fine. I have bought tubers in Walmart. I'm not ashamed. I have, and they did just fine, but just beware. I like to buy from the growers, and this is one of my favorites. And I'm not saying Rutgers endorses them. This is where I buy them. This is me. This is not Master Gardeners talking. I like this Swan Island dahlias. They're located in Canby, Oregon, and pray to God that they're safe with all those fires out there. But they're one of the leading dahlia growers in the United States. They produce 370 varieties. They introduce 5 to 15 hybrids per year. And they have a magnificent Dahlia Festival in August that I would love to visit someday. Dahlias.com is their website. This is on your handout if you received that. What I like about them is they produce the best catalog in the business. It's beautiful, 75 pages of beautiful photographs organized by bloom size. They start with the big boys first, and then they go down. But they have their website has a great help center tab. They've just reorganized it, and it really is well done. And that's where you can order from. Um, I'm going to talk about a great video that they have in a little bit about how to pinch your dahlias. But it's a great organization. I order from them every year, and they stand by their products. So Swan Island's my number one. There's another outfit located in New Jersey, actually, Lakewood, New Jersey, called Longfield Gardens. Okay, they have a great website, beautifully designed. They have a Learn tab that provides excellent growing and planting advice. And so does Swan Island, by the way. This one I'm showing you, a Luna Claire Obscure, I actually am growing that this year. Um, it doesn't have as much white on the tips as this picture is showing, but it is showing some white on the tips. But it's like a electric violet color. It really is very pretty. But Longfield Gardens, they get their tubers from Holland. But what I like about them is, when you order from them, you tell them when you want to receive them, and then when you get them, you can tell they've been maintained in the right environment. The peat moss that they're stored in is still damp, a little bit damp, and it hasn't been sitting on a shelf in a warm store. It comes to you right from their warehouses. So they're another favorite of mine, and their customer service is excellent, by the way. If you ever have a problem or you have a question, they're really great. I also order from the Dahlia Barn. They're located in North Bend, Washington. And this one I'm showing here, Mingus Tony, I've already ordered this for next year because I was looking for a pretty picture and I said, wow, that's really nice. That's pale pink with dark pink splotches. And so I think my color scheme next year is going to be pink. And they too have a Dahlia Care tab on their website, and you can get some great information from there. There's a outfit that just specializes in heirloom varieties. They're located in Ann Arbor, Michigan, oldhousegardens.com. I don't think they're a grower. They just, get dahlias from other growers and then resell them. A real popular heirloom is Cafe au Lait, which I'm showing in the bottom right. That was introduced in 1969, so that makes it an heirloom. And this is really popular with brides. And I have grown this, and it really is beautiful. The picture does not do it justice. So when you buy in a retail store, this is what the packaging looks like. I'm sure you've all seen it. Now this one, Lady Darlene, I bought this at the Philadelphia Flower Show this year. A lot of vendors are selling dahlias like this. There were two in this package, and that's what it looked like on the right. I think that was the last social event I attended this year, because COVID was just starting to flare up, and we took the bus to Philadelphia, but everybody was a little nervous, but it all worked out. So that's Lady Darlene. And this is what it looks like in my garden. And on the right, that was what the first bloom looked like. And I'm like, gee, that doesn't look like the package. But that bloomed in July, where in central coastal Jersey was hot and dry. And I think it affected the bloom color. I really do. And the photo on the left is fairly recently, a couple weeks ago. And it's showing more of the yellow like it's supposed to. But it really is gorgeous, and kind of like a cherry red on the tips with the golden yellow. It's really pretty. It's a dinner plate variety. So this is what it looks like when you order dahlias from Swan Island or Dahlia Barn. Okay, they're individual tubers, and as you can see, one is long and skinny, and one looks like a chicken leg drumstick. And Swan Island actually, if you can see the circle, if you could just barely make out, they actually stamped the name of the dahlia right on the tuber so that you know what's what. It comes in one, package of peat moss, but the amount of effort required to clean and label and, provide the crown with the eye. I mean, it's an incredible amount of work, but that's one reason I like ordering from the grower, and I can just buy one of a certain variety. I don't have to buy 3 in a package. If I want to buy 8 different types, I buy 8 different ones. If I want to buy 8 of the same thing, I buy 8 of the same thing. But I tend to grow one of each variety because I like to make bouquets and I like variety. And then this is packaging from Longfield Gardens. So they do kind of a hybrid. They give you a nicely packaged tuber, and they also give you some special notes. Like this says, be assured that tuber size does not affect the performance, and this produces smaller than average tubers. Now, Labyrinth, 2 years ago, you could not buy a Labyrinth. I don't know what it was. And if you notice, there was only 1 tuber in this bag, 1 tuber clump. That's unusual. They usually give you at least 2, sometimes 3, but they only gave you 1 Labyrinth. And it was worth growing, but that's another reason why you want to order your Dahlia tubers early. Like I wanted Labyrinth, I couldn't get it. So, I ordered really early this year, probably in January. And I've already ordered for next year. So how early is that? So now we'll talk about how do you prepare your beds and plant these tubers. And there's a couple things you can do to really make your dahlias dazzling, and I'll point those steps out to you. So just the basic fundamentals, they need full sun. The more sun, the more flowers you get. In the warmer climates, like zones 8, 9, 10, they do require some shade in the afternoon because it's so hot and the sun is so strong. I felt that way even in coastal New Jersey, zone 7 this year. We had a very hot and dry July and August. And I think my plants were suffering. I mean, I had to water them a lot more than normal. And they were, they're on the south side of my house, right against the house. They were cooking. If I could have put up some shade for them, I probably would have. Soil, it has to be very well drained. It's important because when you plant your tubers, they can rot. You don't want them to be soaking wet. You want it very well drained soil, rich in organic matter, slightly acidic. And that's why it's important to do soil testing, because pH is the measure of acidity in the soil. And if you're way off, your plants cannot, not just dahlias, any plant, they can't absorb the nutrients they need. It's like putting up a wall around your plant and they can't absorb nutrients. So if your pH is 8.0, I mean, your dahlias are not going to be happy and they're not going to do well. So, definitely if all else fails, like, our Master Gardener offices are closed due to the virus, we usually do free pH tests. But you can actually buy a pH meter and, it'll give you a ballpark. Make sure you're kind of in the range. If it's 4.5, suppose that bed you used to grow hollies there and you were throwing holly tone every year and made it acidic. Your dahlias are not going to do well there. So slightly acidic, 6.5. 7.0 is neutral, by the way. 2 weeks before you plant, just, throw a little fertilizer around, a 10-10-10. And if you don't know what those numbers mean, I will talk about that in a couple more slides. So here in this zone, and all zones, I assume, except for those really warmer zones, 8 and higher, after the last frost date in spring, they like warm temperatures, 60 degrees or warmer. Choose a wind sheltered location if it's possible. We had that hurricane Isaias or whatever. I mean, it actually ripped some of my dahlias out of the ground, and the winds weren't even that strong. Maybe 40 50 mile an hour gusts. But if you can shelter them a little bit, it could help. And you have to stake or cage a dahlia if it's greater than 3 feet tall, because they're heavy plants with heavy blooms. We'll talk more about staking later. But if anything you do, you need to stake them properly. You could pretty much stick a tuber in the ground. Something's going to come up. That's not, we're here to talk about dazzling dahlias. So we're not just going to stick it in the ground. We're going to do all the steps to make them the best they can be. But if you don't do anything I talk about tonight, staking is very important. And spacing is very important for the large varieties because if they don't have enough airflow, they can get powdery mildew. And my dahlia bed is, my main dahlia bed is 4x6, and I only have 5 tubers, 5 plants planted there. And I staggered them. I put 3 across the front and 2 in the rear. And the 2 in the rear are the lady Darlene's, which are the dinner plates. So I put those in the back. And that's a good planting plan, you know. That's about how much space they need. So to plant them, now we're getting to the nitty gritty. So what you want to do is you dig a planting hole at least 6 inches deep and wide enough to accommodate either the single tuber or the tuber clump. Depending on how you order them, you either got the clump or the single tubers. Mix in a handful of compost or bone meal in the bottom of the planting hole. Now, I read an article from a dahlia farmer who he actually digs the hole 12 inches deep and fills it with 6 inches of compost at the bottom. The point here is that you need some nourishment in the bottom of that hole to get your tubers off to a good start. Okay, you'll see that I use bone meal this year, but you mix it into the bottom of the hole. You place your single tubers horizontally with the eye pointing upward. Now, this is something I always did wrong. So remember this. It's almost like you're putting them to bed. You just lay them down. If you happen to put it with the eye facing downward, don't worry. It knows how to correct itself. So, but if you can see the, you know, if you have a little growth showing, make sure that's pointing up. And the tuber clumps, you put them upright and vertical and with at least 1 inch of soil covering last year's stem. And if the eye is sprouting and the sprout is longer than 2 inches, you can trim it down and it won't hurt anything. So if you're staking the dahlia, now's the time to put the stake in the hole so you don't pierce the tubers later. Okay, either put a thick wooden stake or maybe a metal stake. You backfill with soil, tamp down lightly, and I like to mark the planting location with a plant label. Now this is something that we're not used to doing. As gardeners, you plant something, a tree, a shrub, a perennial, water, 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 keep it well. You don't do that with tubers. Water sparingly, if at all. Tubers don't absorb nutrients or water until the roots begin to grow. So if you load the tuber up with water, it can rot. So unless you're planting in total dust, don't water at all. I dug my hole, put my tubers in and covered them up. That was it. I did not water them. So, you know, when you're planting, maybe take a look at the weather. You know, if they're predicting a week of rain, maybe you hold off until conditions dry up a little bit. And just know dahlias take a long time to bloom, depending on the size of the plant. And the larger the flower, the longer it will take to bloom. So once you get them in the ground, it's going to take a while for you to see blooms, but once you do, it's so well worth it. So here's a picture of my tuber clump vertical, and you can see some bone meal scattered around, and then I just stick a label so I remember where I planted it. And there's my horizontal single tuber, and there's my bed on the right. So you just lay it in the hole and then cover it up. Now, 3 weeks after planting, that's the growth that I saw. And yes, I did plant these too early. May 4th was too early, but I got excited. It got warm and I was doing this presentation. And I planted too early, and so I was running out every night and covering up to keep the soil warm. But 3 weeks after planting, that's how much growth you can expect to see. You can grow dahlias in containers. So obviously choose compact varieties, maybe the border dahlias or the mignons or the singles. And the bigger container you can use, the better. Minimum per tuber is 12 inches deep and wide. And the benefit of growing in containers, you can move them around. If there's going to be a bad storm, you could, you know, put it against your house. If you can turn them around, if the blooms are better on one side, or you can stick them in a place in your garden where they're, you know, maybe you have a hole, and definitely, you know, protect from, you know, if there's a bad storm coming in, you can stick them under the eaves of your house. So that's the benefit of planting in containers. I think I'm going to try it next year. So what's different about growing in containers? We haven't talked yet about watering or fertilizing, but just realize you should never use the pre-fertilized potting soil. It has too much nitrogen in it. Just get plain, regular potting soil without the extra fertilizer. And what's different about planting them in the containers is you water the tubers at planting time, because that potting soil is going to be dry. So you do make sure it's moist, and do give them a drink. Don't let the container dry out once the tubers start growing, because they do dry out faster in containers, and you might even have to water them daily. And like any containers, you kind of have to fertilize them more often than if they were planted in the ground. But we'll talk about frequency in a couple more slides. Oh, okay. Does anybody have any questions up to this point?
We did have a question. I forget from who, but I'll find out. But it's how many years do you get out of a tuber? That's from Regina, actually.
Well, that's not an easy answer. So dahlias are not hardy in this zone, so you're supposed to dig them up every year and then overwinter them and then replant them the next year. However, I do keep them in the ground, and I've had one tuber in the ground. I haven't dug it up. It's got to be, I think this is going on its third year. So you can keep them for a couple years. And I'm going to show you the method of how I overwinter them outdoors. And then once you dig them up, that's how you propagate them year after year after year. I think they can go on for quite some time. It's not just 1 year. I mean, you don't have to. It's not just 1 year and done. If you follow the proper overwintering techniques that I'm going to talk about later.
There was a question regarding how many dahlias do you actually grow in your garden? How many varieties?
I have 6, 8, 9, 10. I have 10 right now.
Okay. And then can you plant them amongst other plants, or should you plant them together? Or, I mean, I know spacing becomes an issue, but somebody was talking about a small community garden. Can you plant, how would you plant them?
Yeah, you could just use the same technique I described. You just, make sure they have enough room, but you can certainly plant them in a perennial border or anywhere, where you have garden space. But yeah, definitely you could plant them among other plants. Just don't crowd them too much, because they do need good air circulation.
Good answer. I was starting to type, but I'm like, it's easier to ask you. And someone had a question saying that she has a dahlia, or I'm sorry, I don't know if that's a he or she, a dahlia that does not bloom. Is it a lack of sun?
It could be. There's going to be, at the very end, we're going to go through problem solving, and I list a couple of reasons. And you could have planted it too deep, not enough water, not enough food, not enough sun. All the things that I'm talking about. It could be any one of those things. You didn't pinch the plant when it was young. You could have been feeding it with too much nitrogen. So we're going to go over these things.
Okay. Yeah, and another one I think that'll pertain to that is if the tuber didn't bloom the first year, or will it bloom the following? But I think that'll be something you'll talk about as well.
Yeah.
So, okay, I think that's, unless Patty has any other.
Someone said that their dahlia started to grow up in the spring, I believe, and a groundhog ate it. If maintained properly for winter, can I expect it to grow and bloom next year? I think you're going to probably cover.
I would say yes, it will, because the tubers weren't damaged, the tubers weren't eaten. So if yeah, we'll talk about overwintering, but yeah, if the tubers are still intact, you should be able to grow a plant from them next year.
Okay. And yeah, somebody had just made a comment about dahlias in containers needed to be watered. It looks like 4 times daily, which may have been maybe the size of the pot, but it was also very hot. So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it was a tough year, tough growing year, tough year all the way around, but for gardening too.
Yes, our bingo cards are definitely not, we're never expected to have so many different possibilities for 2020, but.
For sure. Okay, I'll move along. So now we're going to talk about care. You've got them planted. Now, how do you take care of them? Okay, well, I talked about when you plant the tubers in the ground, don't water them until you start seeing the green growth appear. Then you start watering pretty deeply because remember those tubers are 6 inches deep and that's where the roots are going to be. They're pretty thirsty plants. Um, as with any plant, you avoid wetting the foliage. You apply water to the root level. I know that's not always possible, but if you can, use a watering wand, soaker hose, or drip irrigation rather than overhead watering if possible. But I realize not everybody has the time to stand there and water by hand, as I do. So if you're going to water by sprinkler, do it early in the morning so that the foliage has a chance to dry out all day. And like we just talked about, container grown plants need to be watered more often because they dry out way, a lot more quickly than when they're in the ground. And when temperatures were, we had many, many days over 90. And if they weren't 90, they were 89. And that's not normal for around here. Humidity 100%, it was pretty bad. So keep a clean garden. Pests like to hide in weeds. You never use any herbicides around dahlias like preen. You think you're going to cut down on your weeds. Don't do it. Just weed by hand the old fashioned way. You deadhead spent blooms to keep the plants tidy, and that encourages more blooms. And I'm going to talk more about harvesting blooms later, but it's actually very good for the plant to harvest and cut the blooms. And don't crowd with other plants. Maintain airflow. So that goes back to what we said a little while ago. Mulching. In a wet year, you might run into trouble with slugs. Average rainfall, the mulch keeps weeds under control, maintains soil moisture, and not just for dahlias, but for any plant, you'll always keep the mulch 6 inches away from the stem. You never want to put the mulch right next to the stem because that encourages disease and pests. One trick that I do is when I'm mulching, I cover the stuff I don't want to cover with mulch with some sort of container because I throw mulch around like crazy. I'm not very neat. And then when I take off the protection, I've got nice little circles where I didn't want the mulch to be. And you can see there's where 2 of my dahlias are. So feeding, you start fertilizing when new growth starts to appear. And there's a couple schools of thought on frequency. Some growers say every 2 weeks, some say every 4 weeks. So I just split the difference and I feed about every 3 weeks. Just, they need food, they need to be fed. And I think like this time of year, you can stop fertilizing. It's about a month before the first frost, at least in this area. And you want to kind of coax your tubers into dormancy. They're going into winter. You don't want to encourage a lot of growth right at this time of year. And when you're feeding, you saturate the soil first, you give it a good drink, and then you apply your fertilizer. I use water soluble fertilizer, obviously, because I mulch with the shredded cedar. So the fertilizer granules, they'd be landing on the mulch rather than near to the plant. So make sure your plants are hydrated and then feed them. And container grown dahlias, just like any container grown plant, they leach out the nutrients every time you water. So definitely, I would say every 2 weeks, feed your container grown dahlias. And you want to use a low nitrogen fertilizer. So the person who didn't have a lot of blooms, if you're using high nitrogen, it results in bushy leafy plants with not many blooms. So you want to use a fertilizer that is higher in phosphorus and potassium. If you look on the left, you see the photo, you see the numbers 10, 30, 20. So those represent the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium levels in that fertilizer in that order. phosphorus is the middle number, and that's the number that you want to be higher. So you can see the 30 is higher, um, higher than potassium, and definitely the nitrogen is the lowest. So you want a low nitrogen fertilizer. Now I'm going to talk about staking methods. Okay, dahlias are tall plants and they have large blooms, and staking will reduce sprawling, broken stems, broken blooms. They want to grow upright, but they just need a little help. They're actually easier to stake than tomato plants. Tomato plants want to sprawl. Dahlias want to grow upright. The shorter dahlias, the border dahlias, you don't have to stake. And the best time to stake or cage dahlias is when you initially plant them. And hilling soil, mounding soil around the base of the plant does not work. So don't even think about doing that. So staking methods for home gardeners, wooden or metal stakes inserted at planting time. And then you tie the central stem to the plant the central stem to the stake as the plant grows. Tomato cage, if the aesthetics don't bother you, and that's what I use because it's easiest, or bamboo pole teepees. You just get a few bamboo poles and you gather them at the top with zip ties or twine. So here's the staking method. It's inexpensive, and if you just have a few plants to stake, it's probably the easiest. You just have to, as the plant grows, you just have to, make sure you secure that main stem. And you can use any of these standard twist ties, garden velcro, stretchy garden tape. Anything will work. Here's the tomato cage. It's very easy. These square tomato cages that fold flat for storage, they're ideal. Or you can use the round tomato cages, and you can either do them upside down, cut off the legs, and then just secure them at the bottom if you want to use that method. But this is what I did this year. That's my 4x6 bed where I have the 5 tubers planted, and I just use these green tomato cages. And this was a couple years ago. I used just some tomato cages that I had, and yeah, maybe it's not the prettiest, but it keeps my plants upright. And if the plants get big enough, it hides the cages. So that's easy, and that's what I do. And then here's, you can make the teepee, but then you kind of have to encircle it with twine, 3 or 4 poles per plant. It's labor intensive, to create the teepees, I guess, but it's effective if you only have a few plants. For larger operations, maybe if you're growing, you're a dahlia farmer, or you're growing like huge rows of dahlias for cutting, a string trellising is probably a better option for you. You bury wooden or metal stakes on both sides of the row every 3 or 4 plants, and then you like make a trellis with some biodegradable jute. It's labor intensive, but blooms are easy to harvest. And then there's something called a Hortonova trellis, which is basically a horizontal trellis so the plants can grow through them. And I'll show you an example. So this is what string trellising looks like. You have the stakes, and then you have string along each side, and it just keeps the plants in bounds. And this was a picture at Longfield Gardens in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. If you've ever been there, they use the string trellising method. These plants are really packed. I was kind of surprised. They really need more air circulation, but that's Longfield Gardens. I didn't see any sign of disease or anything. So I guess it's okay. But they use the string trellising method. And this is a horizontal method. This is the rose room at Longfield Gardens, but you can see the point. It's layers of horizontal grid. The problem is it's difficult to harvest the blooms. It's labor intensive. Probably not for the home gardener, but for a big installation, perhaps it would work. All right, any questions?
I had to find the unmute button. Yes, well, somebody asked about the tomato cages, which you had put on there. Somebody, I know you're going to talk about when overwintering because they want to know when the tubers can be dug.
Yep.
Yeah, and then that was, I think that's all I saw in the chat. I don't know if Patty.
That's all I saw.
Okay.
Yep.
We'll definitely cover that. All right. So this is how you really get dazzling dahlias. And you'll hear various terms: pinching, topping off, disbudding, trimming. So whatever you want to call it, it's a very critical step to really get great plants. And why is it important? So the objective is you want to remove the center of the plant in its first bud. And that generates a shorter, bushier, sturdier plant with longer stems and better blooms. And you can even turn a non-cut flower variety into a cut flower variety, and it creates a first-class bloom on every branch. If you don't pinch, you get tall, skinny plants, a big center stalk with weak side shoots. And you know, that's not what we want. We want our dahlias to be healthy and robust and really dazzling. And it seems harsh and it's a little scary, but the plant benefits and responds beautifully. So don't be afraid to do it. So it's not an exact science, and I'll talk more about that later, but when the plant's 18 to 24 inches tall, you remove the main stem down to the lower 3 or 4 leaf sets. You don't do it on a very hot or rainy day. Early in the morning is best when it's still cool out. And when you do make this cut, you wait at least 24 hours if you're going to be watering overhead. And if it's going to have rain in the forecast, wait, hold off. Because you'll see when you cut that main stem, it's hollow. And if you get water down that hollow stem, it could fill with water and it could cause rot. So this is Swan Island Dahlias, my favorite place. They have some great videos on their website. You go to the Help Center tab, and I think it says How to Grow Dahlias in Summer. And you'll find this video. This woman in purple is actually one of the daughters. And she goes, it's actually, if you really are interested, it's a 4 minutes. I don't want to say it's hilarious, but they are totally traumatized the day their father pulls a mower set at 20 inches and pulls a tractor and just whacks down every plant in the farm. And they said their neighbors come over and console them. And as many years as they've been in the business, they're still traumatized. So there's nothing exact about what they do, but it's best for the plant and they benefit greatly from it. So don't be afraid to do it. And so here's when I cut back one of my dahlias, and you could see I went pretty far down and I cut off the big portion of the main trunk. I used a pair of scissors. And if you can see the arrow, you can see how hollow that stem is. I did this early in the morning, and of course I went in and Al Roker was on TV saying we're going to have thunderstorms. So I ran out and put a plastic bag over the tomato cage and then protected it from rain. So you definitely don't want to do this when there's any rain in the forecast. And you can trim the plants back at any time of season if they're getting out of hand for whatever reason or too tall. You can cut them back, give them a haircut, and they will bounce right back and come back bushier. Now this is what happens when you don't pinch a dahlia. Just that big, long, tall, skinny shoot. And all is not lost. Actually, this dahlia got torn out of the ground by that hurricane, remnants of that hurricane we had, and I just pushed it back in the ground. It broke a little bit. I trimmed it, and actually that's the Bella Barmera, and it's blooming like crazy now. So they're pretty sturdy plants, and they bounce back. Everybody thinks they're so delicate, it's too much work. No, they're not. They're very, very hardy. So we'll talk about harvesting blooms now. So, you've just done all these best practices to grow the best dahlias, and now enjoy them. So this is the little bouquet that I had cut at the end of the season one year with my cosmos and some dahlias, excuse me, some Japanese anemones, and bring them in, enjoy them. You've earned it. And then I have this, this photo was actually taken at the end of October one year. And you can see I've got my Thanksgiving cornucopia in the background. But there must have been a frost coming, so I quickly ran outside and whatever blooms were there, I just cut and stuck in my little vase. But this was the end of October one year. Harvesting is good for the plant. Don't be afraid. It encourages more blooms. You harvest like any harvesting you do. You do it early in the morning, avoid the hot sun. And the flowers should be pretty fully open. They don't open much after you cut them. So make sure they are 3/4 to fully open. You cut deep into the plant. The longer the stems you cut, the more long stems will grow back. And this came right from a dahlia farmer whose livelihood is based on growing dahlias, cut flowers. They cut them really long and they swear the plant will send up those long stems again. When you harvest, you strip off some extra foliage, and the more foliage you cut off, the more the flowers will hydrate. Keep enough foliage to make it look pretty, but you can cut off some of the foliage. And when you harvest, use a plastic bucket and place the cut flowers into very, very hot tap water. Okay, that they will not hydrate if you use cold water. They said as hot as it can come out of your tap, and use a plastic bucket because the glass, anything like a glass vase, it just cools off a lot quicker than a plastic bucket will. So that's why you see these harvesting buckets are made of plastic. And then maybe be careful the steam from the water doesn't cook the blooms. So just maybe drape them over the side of the bucket. And you know, when you hydrate the blooms like this, they'll last a lot longer in the vase. Now we talked about, you know, dahlias are becoming very popular with brides because they've been featured in these bride magazines. And I would guarantee you this is cafe au lait, and what a beautiful bouquet that makes. So, you know, if you were a florist or, you know, if you were just making a bouquet for somebody or you were having a bridal shower or whatever, after the blooms get cut, you condition them several hours before you arrange. And what that means is you cut them, put them in the hot water, and let the container cool off in a cool spot, and let the blooms drink for several hours. And then when the water gets to room temperature, then you start making your arrangements. Any questions up until now?
Patty had
I
one.
just want to mention, William had said that no matter what color the original tuber he plants, it reverts to gold.
Yeah, never.
That's unusual.
It is unusual.
Hmm.
I was just wondering if maybe that had something to do with the temperature. Kind of, we were talking about cafe au laits kind of be pink. If it's a temperature thing, I don't know.
Well, it would be interesting to know what color he thinks it should be. You know, if it's supposed to be pink and it's gold, I don't know if temperature would cause that.
Regina mentioned the pH issue, but I don't know that that works the same way as I'm not as familiar with that phenomenon as it is with some tulips and other plants.
No, pH does not affect the color of the blooms like it would for a hydrangea.
Yeah, if we'll try to look into it for you, William. Yeah, I think that was the only question I saw too on this round.
All right. All right. So how to overwinter tubers. Somebody was interested. Now this is the time where you start thinking about it. So if you want to keep them for next year, you dig, you divide, and you store them. And these tips came right from the Dahlia farmer. I attended a webinar hosted by that farmer, and this is coming directly from her. So my true confession, I treat dahlias like annuals. I do not overwinter them unless I absolutely love a certain variety. I overwinter them outdoors, and I'll show you how to do that later. But you know, there's so many beautiful varieties. You know, I want to grow them all. You know, I want to try them all. And as much as I love some, you know, maybe I'll share them with a friend or whatever, but I like to plant different ones every year. So when you dig them, so after the first frost. So the first step is optional for a home gardener. Um, as soon as the first frost hits, they turn to mush. They turn blackish brown mush, and you'll never be able to identify them. So before the first frost, if you really care about what variety you're going to be digging up, put some sort of a label tied around the base of the plant. After it turns to mush, after the first frost, you remove the stakes, cut the stem to 6 inches, and leave it in the ground for at least 10 days. Okay, that kind of hardens off the tuber and kind of starts its dormancy. After 10 days, you use a fork or shovel to loosen the soil around the plant, and then lift the tubers out of the ground and be careful not to damage the crown. You clean off the soil. You can either use water or a rag or air, and you let them cure for a few days in a dry place, maybe your garage or a shed or your basement. And when I have attempted to overwinter tubers, I use those plastic trays that you get when you buy, 6 packs of annuals and whatever. I always keep those, and that kind of gave the tubers good air circulation to dry off. And then the farmer said you cut out the mother tuber, and said the mother tuber, which is the plant, the tuber that produced the plant this year, looks a little different. It's more crinkly and it's darker, but said they won't store well over the winter and could rot, and the rot could spread to other tubers. So you try to cut out that mother tuber, and then you can divide the clumps in now or in spring or not at all. And what dividing means is cutting apart the crown into with one or more tubers attached to it. And when you divide, does not affect storage, but in the fall they say it's easier to see the eyes. In the spring, it's more difficult, and I think the clump is a little more dried out, so it might be harder to divide. And when you divide the clump, you don't save every tuber, just the good ones. Anything that's too skinny or damaged, you can toss. And they say you can assume you have an eye if you have a big piece of crown. So I think the eyes are a little difficult to see, but each tuber must have at least a piece of the crown with 1 or 2 eyes in order to grow a plant next year. And so I guess you can use your method of choice. You can use sharp scissors, and I'll always, disinfect them, because if something does have a fungus, you don't want to spread it to all your tubers. But you can see the crown there, and you're dividing it in half. So now you've dug them up, you've cured them, you've divided them or not. So you want to put them in a container that has airflow. That could be a paper box or a bag or a crate lined with newspaper. You lay the tubers flat and you cover them in sawdust, peat moss, vermiculite, perlite, sphagnum moss. Should be a little bit moist. You don't want bone dry peat moss, just a little bit of moisture. You can place sheets of newspaper between the layers, and then you store them in a cool environment, 40 to 50 degrees. The more consistent, the better. That's another reason I don't overwinter. I just do not have I don't have a basement, and my garage gets so cold in the winter that they just freeze on me. So I don't even have the right environment to store them. But if you do, I know plenty of people that are successful, even like living right near me, but for some reason they're more successful than I am. But it's important to keep them cool. And here's an example. It's just a cardboard box with some peat moss and newspaper layers. And just look at them periodically. And if anything doesn't look good, get rid of them as soon as you can. You don't want them to infect the whole box there. And then when spring comes, you remove the tubers from the container. You look for rot and toss out the ones that aren't good. Bring them indoors to encourage them to sprout. And then when the conditions are right, you know, after the frost and water, the soil is warm enough, and then you plant them outdoors again. Any questions about overwintering tubers?
I'm not seeing any other pop up. Somebody did ask about disinfecting. How do you disinfect? And I said the 10% bleach to 90% water. Is that the normal?
Yeah, I do that, or I use just alcohol wipes.
Okay.
Especially these days, it's easy to find. You know, that comes in like a little handy wipe package, and you can just disinfect like that.
Okay.
Susan, what time is it? I
It's
don't have any.
7:41. So we did go over a little bit.
Oh shoot. Okay. All right, we're coming to the end here. If you can all hang in there with me. We'll talk about pests and diseases. There's nothing terribly unusual that attacks dahlias. You might have a problem with slugs and snails when the plants are emerging from the soil early in the season. If you see this kind of damage happening, just use the slug bait that you normally use. And when the dahlias get higher, you know, taller than 12 inches, usually the problem goes away. They don't fall off the plants. And then there's always insects that pierce and suck sap, and they don't just affect dahlias, but you can get aphids and thrips on your dahlias. Check for the aphids under the leaves, and thrips might attack developing buds. So to control them, you can, you know, blast them off with water, or use an organic insecticidal soap, or hope the lady beetle larva comes in and takes care of the problem for you. One thing that I like to do, and I do this all over my property, is I plant sweet alyssum. That's that white flower that attracts syrphid flies. They're these tiny little flies. They almost look like bees. They're also known as hoverflies, and their larvae prey on aphids and thrips and scale, but aphids and thrips specifically. And I plant alyssum around my dahlias, around my daylilies, and you can just throw some seeds around and just sow them, and it's very easy to grow. So that's one tip that I would like to share with you. Spider mites could be a problem, hot and dry conditions. That's what it looks like. Damage will eventually kill the plant. So this could be a very, if this happens to your plants, try to take care of it right away with insecticidal soap that contains a miticide. And as with anything you spray on a plant, never if it's above 85 degrees, because you'll just really burn your plants worse than they are. Japanese beetles, of course, right when you're ready to, you know, buds are ready to bloom, that's when they start attacking them. Just hand pick and toss them into a bucket of soapy water. Put your garden gloves on first, of course. Earwigs, they like to hide under weeds and things like that, so that's why it's important to keep weeding under control. Not too much you can do about them. You really need a heavy population to do a lot of damage, and just use over-the-counter insecticidal soap control. And then everybody's favorite, deer. And anything can happen with deer, but dahlias are not on their menu. So, but you know, if they're hungry enough, they'll eat anything. Powdery mildew caused by high temps, humidity, fungus doesn't kill the plant. Strip off affected foliage. Some of the grower sites might have, might have a search capability that says disease resistant. I'm not quite sure about that, but you might want to look for that. And definitely always practice proper plant spacing. That's a way you can avoid it from happening. Problem solving. So your tubers rotted during storage, even though you did everything you thought right. So possible causes are you dug them too early. You didn't leave them in the ground for 10 days after the frost. You could have had too much moisture in the container. There could have just had a fungal disease that you weren't aware of. Your storage temps could be off. Or 1 year I tried with a styrofoam container, and that did not work at all. It was not it didn't have enough airflow. So you could have used, the wrong kind of container. It didn't have enough airflow. So this is what I do to overwinter outdoors. So when the frost blackens the foliage, I cut the stems down to ground level. Then I take a empty container and I fill it with dry mulch. I use shredded cedar mulch. I flip the container upside down over the tuber, make sure I cover the holes with something and put a brick on top. So I'm creating like a 10-inch deep layer of mulch on top of my tuber. And that has worked for me many years. I mean, this past winter was pretty mild, but it's worked for me every year I've tried it. And then in the spring, when temperatures start to warm up, you take off the container, you gently brush aside the mulch. And if the tuber's already sprouted, that's okay. They'll be fine. They'll be white because they haven't photosynthesized, but they'll be fine. You can trim them back a little bit. But this is how if I want to save a variety that I really like, this is what I do. And the problem that you have few blooms, it could be that you didn't pinch them when they were young, because pinching encourages branching and better blooms, sturdier blooms. Insufficient sun could be the reason, overfeeding with too much nitrogen, or you just didn't water them enough. They were just struggling. Or it could have been just really, really hot, like it was in New Jersey this year. All right, I think we came to the end here. So one of the services we provide, Monmouth County Master Gardeners, you can call us or send email. Typically, the offices would be open, but for obvious reasons, they're not. You don't have to write this down. This is in the handout, how to contact us. But our helpline is being manned, is being staffed. So either call or send email, and someone will get back to you. And this is our anti-discrimination laws. And there we go. Thank you. This is the end. And this is a little bouquet I grew one year. And I guess I was in a pink mood. I was in the pink that year.
Well, thank you.
So I think I lost Susan's audio. I don't know if anybody can hear me.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I thought I unmuted myself, but I think I muted it. But in any case, there were a couple of questions, if you don't mind. There were still like 2 or 3 questions on the overwintering part. So let me bring it back up in the Q&A. I got a couple of thank you, very informative, excellent. Oh, fudge! Now I just can't move my screen.
I do have one. I do have one here.
Go ahead.
I've heard of people doing this, potting them up before you actually bring them out in the spring to kind of jumpstart them. Is that a good idea?
Yeah, I have actually done that. I have started the tubers in grower's pot, in April, and kept them in my garage until they started to sprout. And then when temperatures warmed up in May around here, this is when we plant in mid-May, and then kind of got my tubers off to a good start. So yes, you can definitely do that, and you can be successful doing that.
Okay. Jane put, Patty, you answered it, I believe. Do you let the stems dry out before cutting down in the winter?
Well, they actually turn to mush. So as soon as that first frost hits, and that's going to be around here in about a month, depending on where you live, it could be, I think somebody said they had a frost up in North Jersey already.
Sussex.
That already happened in Sussex, yeah. So it's not going to dry out. It's going to turn to mush, and then you just cut it off about 10 inches.
Okay. And is there only one mother tuber in a clump?
Yes, there's only one mother tuber. And, you saw those tuber clumps and, planted the whole clump. Only one main stem comes up. You're not going to get a multiple stems. So somehow the tuber crown knows only one eye is going to make that main stem. So you're not going to get like a dahlia with like 6, main trunks. That doesn't happen.
Okay. I think the last one I see on here is when do you bring them in to warm them up, which I think you just mentioned in April. You bring them in April
Yeah.
to warm them up for, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I just couldn't remember. I'm trying to read and listen to your answers. Sometimes gets a little interesting. So
As you know, Susan, plants don't have calendars. It's all based on temperature. It could be, we could have a zone 5 winter, and that has happened, even though we're zone 7. So, you have to watch the weather. You have to pay attention to temperatures. That's what the plants do. They don't know that it's April 15th or it's May 15th. It's all based on weather conditions. So, you can have general guidelines, but you have to be flexible.
okay. All right. And I think that was the biggest things that you have in here. Excellent presentation. Bravo. So I want to say thank you, Debbie. That was really awesome. I know we went over time, but we didn't lose too many at that point. So I think that's great. You answered all the questions as well. So I want to thank everybody for coming through. That's still on. We still have 58 on. So if you can and stay on after we stop the program, there will be a survey that you can answer, and that will also help us to give you some new programming as well. And then if you have any questions that you need us to answer for Debbie, we can send them on as well. So I want to thank you again, Debbie, for coming through, and I hope maybe we'll have you in for spring bulbs for the spring.
Oh, I would love to. I would love to.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll work on that. And thank you again. And if you guys have any questions, give us all a holler. And if you did not get the handout, for those that may have just joined in to us a little late, if you did not get the handout, email me or email back to the email that comes in there, the thank you email that comes in for coming on, and we'll go from there. All right. Well, thank you, Debbie and Patty. Thank you for coming on and answering.
Thank you, Debbie. That was wonderful. Great information.
Oh, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. I had fun.
You're very welcome. And Irene says, nice to see y'all. So it's good to see Irene too. So, all right, ladies, we will see you on the other side. And thank you again.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.
Good night. Thank you.
Oh, I got to stop recording first.